नाजरीन, इस वीडियो को लाइक करें, चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करें और बेल आइकॉन को दबाएं ताकि हमारी तमाम वीडियोस आपको मिलती रहें। ब्लैक को दबा दें। Hi, this is Dr. Bashar. I'll today be talking about President Biden's statement about Pakistan's nuclear program and how Pakistanis are reacting to it. As you know, US President Biden's nuclear remarks have sparked outrage in Pakistan. Islamabad recently summoned envoy over US President's most dangerous nation remark, which he gave about Pakistan. Definitely, the remarks triggered an immediate backlash from Pakistan, which summoned the US envoy in Islamabad to explain Biden's uncalled for remarks. US President Joe Biden recently gave a statement describing Pakistan as one of the most dangerous nations in the world and questioning the safety protocols of its nuclear weapons stirred a diplomatic row between the two countries. Incensed by the off-the-cuff remarks at a most critical moment in the patchy relations between the Cold War friends, Islamabad summoned the US ambassador for an explanation. Biden made the remarks last Thursday night while talking about US foreign policy during a private Democratic Party fundraiser in California. But the White House later published a transcript of his comments on Saturday, sparking outrage in Pakistan. Pakistan rejected factually incorrect, misleading remarks of the US president. What I think is maybe one of the most dangerous nations in the world, Pakistan, nuclear weapons without any cohesion, the US president had said. Though the White House spokesperson later played down Biden's remarks, insisting the US president wanted a stable and prosperous Pakistan, the damage had already been done. The remarks triggered an immediate backlash from Pakistan, which summoned the US envoy in Islamabad to explain Biden's uncalled for remarks. I am surprised at President Biden's statement. Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari reacted at a news conference in Karachi hours after the White House released Biden's transcript. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, in a tweet, dismissed concerns over Pakistan's nuclear program. Let me reiterate unequivocally, Pakistan is a responsible nuclear state. And we are proud that our nuclear assets have the best safeguards as per International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA requirements. We take these safety measures with the utmost seriousness. Let no one have any doubts, he tweeted. Meanwhile, Acting Foreign Secretary Johar Salim called in US Ambassador Donald Blum and conveyed Pakistan's disappointment and concern on the unwarranted remarks made by the US president, which were not based on ground reality or facts. It was made clear that Pakistan was a responsible nuclear state and its impeccable stewardship of the nuclear program and adherence to global standards and international best practices was well acknowledged, including by the IAEA, the Foreign Office spokesman said in a press release. The threat to international peace and security was posed by a violation of global norms by some states, repeated nuclear security incidents without any accountability, and arms race between leading nuclear weapon states disturbed regional balance. It was essential to maintain the positive trajectory of Pakistan-US relations and the close cooperation between the two sides to build regional and global peace, the spokesperson said. However, The statement also emphasized Pakistan's desire to seek friendly and mutually beneficial relationship with the US. Pakistan and the US have a long history of friendly and mutually beneficial relationship. At a time when the world is confronted by huge global challenges, it is critically important that genuine and durable efforts are made to recognize the real potential of the Pakistan US relationship while avoiding unnecessary comments. It is our sincere desire to cooperate with the US to promote regional peace and security itself. Bilawal, who is also the Pakistan People's Party chairman, told reporters in Karachi that if there was any question about nuclear safety, then it should be directed to India, which very recently had fired a missile into Pakistani territory and said that it was fired accidentally. Nobody knows the actual, story behind it. This is not only irresponsible and unsafe, but raises genuine and serious concerns about the safety of nuclear capable countries, he pointed out. I'm surprised by the remarks of President Biden. I believe this is exactly the sort of misunderstanding that is created when there is a lack of engagement, he added. Bilawal noted that Pakistan had embarked on a journey of engagement and just marked the 75th anniversary of bilateral engagements with the US. If this was such a concern, I imagine it would have been raised in that meeting with me. I believe that we have just started our journey of engagement and we will have many more opportunities to engage with the US and address any concerns and misconceptions they might have to this specific question, the minister said. However, Bilawal was confident that Biden's statement would not sour relationship between the two countries. He said, I don't believe it negatively impacts the relations between Pakistan and the US. We will continue on the positive trajectory of engagements we are having so far, the foreign minister maintained. He also tried to play down Biden's statement by suggesting that it was a fundraiser event and not an official statement, adding that this aspect must be looked into as well. The White House said President Biden's remarks about Pakistan's nuclear program were nothing new, as he had made such comments earlier as well. In response to a question during a media briefing, Press Secretary said Biden viewed a secure and prosperous Pakistan as critical to US interests. So that is something about what his views have been on Pakistan, the press secretary said. More specifically, he made those comments before, so that is nothing new about what you heard from him last night, she said. To show how dangerous the developed countries and Indian nuclear programs are, please watch this whole video in which I have given details of nuclear accidents occurring in the world, in the US, in the USSR, and in other countries, as well as in India. And please don't forget to subscribe this channel and like this video and press the bell icon so that you get all such videos in future. And please don't forget to comment on this video. Thank you.
From 1994 to 2021, over 200 kilograms uranium theft in India poses nuclear terrorism threats. The theft of over 200 kilograms of nuclear material over the last 2 decades in India poses a serious threat of nuclear terrorism, necessitating action by the global powers to address poor safety standards in the country. China and Pakistan, the countries neighboring India, have been calling for strengthening regulations following repeated incidents of theft of nuclear material in India, Such incidents have raised concerns about India, which has emerged as a potential hotspot in the illegal trade of nuclear technology and materials vital for a malicious nuclear supply chain for state and non-state actors. According to a timeline issued by the South Asia Strategic Stability Institute, SASI, 18 nuclear materials theft and lost incidents were reported in India from 1994 to 2021 involving over 200 kilograms of nuclear material. The Indian authorities recovered 2.5 kilograms uranium in 1994, 111 kilograms in 1998, also involving an opposition leader, 59.1 kilograms in 2000, 200 grams in 2001. 225 grams in 2003, 4 kilograms in 2008, 5 kilograms in 2009, 9 kilograms in 2016, 1 kilogram in 2018 and 13.75 kilograms in 2021 in several other incidents. According to a research paper jointly issued by SASI President Dr. Maria Sultan and now Human Rights Minister Dr. Shireen Mazari, the reports of Indian involvement in the theft of nuclear fissile material dates back to the early 1970s, but the magnitude of the threat increased manifold in the 1980s and 1990s. India needs to answer the world: how can the state allow its street criminals to possess uranium? Someone would have used this for terrorism and India would have claimed it was Pakistan. The truth has been exposed. The world must ask India to answer. https://t.co/3nmlqm20r9. In the late 1980s, the CIA had concluded that India was trying to develop a sophisticated hydrogen bomb. In 1994, on a tip-off, a shipment of beryllium was caught in Vilnius, worth $24 million. The material could fall into the hands of extremists and terrorists in India with disastrous consequences. The out-of-control material could also be a cause of concern due to the proliferation reasons. It is also the responsibility of global organizations and India's partners to raise the standard of nuclear safety and security in the country and investigate shortcomings for maintaining tight controls on nuclear and radioactive materials. Should look seriously in this, as it is most dangerous radioactive element used for atomic bomb. Pakistan had repeatedly called for a thorough investigation of such incidents and sought measures for strengthening the security of nuclear materials to prevent their diversion. The latest incident was reported by the Indian NDTV from Kolkata, while quoting a senior officer, where the West Bengal Crime Investigation Department has arrested 2 persons from an area near the Kolkata airport for illegal possession of radioactive substances, which have an estimated worth of Indian rupees 4,250 crore. Radioactive substances worth Rs 4,250 crore seized in Kolkata. 2 arrested. Such incidents were a matter of deep concern as they point to LAX controls, poor regulatory and enforcement mechanisms, as well as the possible existence of a black market for nuclear materials inside India. Imagine 7.1 kilos of highly radioactive stolen uranium worth Rs 30 crores was on sale in India. The IAEA owes the world an explanation. The UNSC must ask for an investigation. United Nations Security Council Resolution 1540 and the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material, CPPNM, made it binding on states to ensure stringent measures to prevent nuclear material from falling into wrong hands. Following the recovery of 7,100 grams of radioactive uranium by the police in Mumbai in May 2021, China had called on all the countries to join treaties for non-proliferation aimed at ensuring nuclear safety. More than 2 decades Pakistan was painted as unsafe country with their nuclear arsenals, while during same period India was epitome of uranium black market. World remained silent. Nuclear terrorism is the security challenge faced by the international community. All governments have the responsibilities to strengthen regulation of nuclear materials to combat nuclear trafficking to ensure the nuclear safety and security. Chinese Foreign Ministry's spokesperson Hua Chunying said, "It is time that the Indian state establishes an independent nuclear regulatory authority." else India will soon be the only state proliferator of nuclear materials to non-state actors and terrorists. At least 11 states in India have uranium reserves, with Andhra Pradesh, Jharkhand and Meghalaya recording the largest reserves of radioactive material. India's inadvertent missile launch underscores the risk of accidental nuclear warfare. Complex weapon systems are inherently prone to accidents, and this latest launch is one of a long history of military accidents in India. BrahMos cruise missiles have been built by India and Russia. Last month, while most of the world focused on the war in Ukraine and worried that a beleaguered Russian leadership might resort to nuclear weapons, thus escalating the conflict into a direct war with the US-led NATO nuclear-armed alliance, a nearly tragic accident involving India and Pakistan pointed to another path to nuclear war. The accident highlighted how complex technological systems, including those involving nuclear weapons, can generate unexpected routes to potential disaster, especially when managed by overconfident organizations. India and Pakistan possess more than 300 nuclear weapons between them, and have fought multiple wars and faced many military crises. On March 9, 3 years after their dispute over Kashmir escalated into attacks by jet fighters, the Pakistan Air Force detected a high-speed flying object inside Indian territory change course and veer suddenly toward Pakistan. It flew deep into Pakistan and crashed. The object was a BrahMos cruise missile, a weapon system developed jointly by India and Russia. India soon stated the launch was an accident. The firing of the BrahMos missile falls within a long history of accidents involving military systems in India. Military aircraft have strayed across the borders during peacetime. India's first nuclear submarine was reportedly crippled by an accident in 2018, but the government refused to divulge any details. Secrecy has prevented the investigation of an apparent failure of India's ballistic missile defense system in 2016. Engagements between India and Pakistan can arise from such accidents, as in 1999 when a Pakistani military plane was shot down along the border by India, killing 16 people. Pakistan has had its share of accidents, including a Pakistani fighter jet crashing into the capital city in 2020. All these weapons systems are inherently accident-prone because of two characteristics identified by organizational sociologist Charles Perrow decades ago: interactive complexity and tight coupling, that combine to make accidents a normal feature of the operation of some hazardous technologies. The first characteristic refers to the possibility that different parts of the system can affect each other in unexpected ways, thus producing unanticipated outcomes. The second makes it hard to stop the resulting sequence of events. For Perrow, the dangerous accidents lie in the system, not in the components, and are inevitable. Perhaps the best and most troubling proof of this proposition is in the realm of nuclear weapons, which embody all the properties of high-risk technological systems. Despite decades of efforts to ensure safety, these systems have suffered many failures, accidents and close calls. During 1979 to 1980, for example, there were several false warnings of Soviet missile attacks, some of which resulted in U.S. nuclear forces being put on alert, illustrating political theorist Benoit Pilopidis' observation that luck has long played a crucial role in preserving the world from nuclear devastation. The BrahMos accident was not more consequential because of three lucky circumstances. First, the missile was not armed with a warhead. Second, the accident occurred during peacetime, not during a bout of armed conflict or a period of military tension between the two countries. Had that been the case, the Pakistani military might have interpreted it as a deliberate attack and responded militarily. Third, BrahMos apparently is not designed to carry nuclear weapons, but India has cruise missiles that can carry nuclear warheads, as does Pakistan. Compounding the risk is the mobility of India's expanding fleet of nuclear-capable missiles. These can be launched quickly from specially developed vehicles that move around on roads or rails, meaning that military planners in Pakistan and China, the nuclear-armed neighbors against whom India has war plans, have to be prepared for sudden missile launches from almost anywhere in India's vast landmass. Given the secretive nature of Indian nuclear policymaking, little is known about India's nuclear command and control system. However, the 1999 draft nuclear doctrine called for assured capability to shift from peacetime deployment to fully employable forces in the shortest possible time. Emphasis added. The combination of technology and plans for being able to rapidly launch nuclear weapons raises the risk of accidental and inadvertent escalation to nuclear war. South Asia's geography is pitiless. It would only take 5 to 10 minutes for a missile launched from India to attack Pakistan's national capital, nuclear weapon command posts or bases. For comparison, the flight times between missile launch sites and targets in the United States and Russia are about 30 minutes. Even this extra time may be insufficient. In the event of a military crisis, no leader can make a judicious decision during this period, when faced with impossible choices. But shorter flight times increase the likelihood of mistakes. The mistake that is of greatest concern is a false alarm of an incoming nuclear attack, possibly directed against nuclear forces, Indian or Pakistani, or Russian or NATO. Policy makers may find themselves under immense pressure to launch a preemptive attack, thereby compounding the crisis. The terrible dilemma confronting them would be whether to use their nuclear weapons first or wait for the bombs from the other side to land. Nuclear war, even of a limited nature, between India and Pakistan could lead to millions of deaths in the short term and even graver consequences in the longer term for the region and beyond. Compounding these dangers is the overconfidence of India's officials, who displayed no recognition of the gravity of the BrahMos accident. A technical malfunction had led to the accidental firing of a missile, the official statement declared. Noting glibly, it is learnt that the missile landed in an area of Pakistan. India's defense minister assured parliament members that the system is very reliable and safe. As the legendary analyst of nuclear command and control Bruce Blair warned, among nuclear weapons system managers and operators there is an illusion of safety that masks the systematic potential for tragedy on a monumental scale. Whether it is India and Pakistan preparing for a fifth war, or the forces of a nuclear-armed Russia struggling ever more violently to subdue Ukraine and stem the flow of lethal NATO weapons, such illusions threaten the destruction of cities and may lead to the killing of nations. India's inadvertent missile launch underscores the risk of accidental nuclear warfare. Complex weapon systems are inherently prone to accidents, and this latest launch is one of a long history of military accidents in India. BrahMos cruise missiles have been built by India and Russia. Last month, while most of the world focused on the war in Ukraine and worried that a beleaguered Russian leadership might resort to nuclear weapons, thus escalating the conflict into a direct war with the U.S., led NATO nuclear-armed alliance. A nearly tragic accident involving India and Pakistan pointed to another path to nuclear war. The accident highlighted how complex technological systems, including those involving nuclear weapons, can generate unexpected routes to potential disaster, especially when managed by overconfident organizations. India and Pakistan possess more than 300 nuclear weapons between them, and have fought multiple wars and faced many military crises. On March 9, 3 years after their dispute over Kashmir escalated into attacks by jet fighters, the Pakistan Air Force detected a high-speed flying object inside Indian territory change course and veer suddenly toward Pakistan. It flew deep into Pakistan and crashed. The object was a BrahMos cruise missile, a weapon system developed jointly by India and Russia. India soon stated the launch was an accident. The firing of the BrahMos missile falls within a long history of accidents involving military systems in India. Military aircraft have strayed across the borders during peacetime. India's first nuclear submarine was reportedly crippled by an accident in 2018, but the government refused to divulge any details. Secrecy has prevented the investigation of an apparent failure of India's ballistic missile defense system in 2016. Engagements between India and Pakistan can arise from such accidents, as in 1999 when a Pakistani military plane was shot down along the border by India, killing 16 people. Pakistan has had its share of accidents, including a Pakistani fighter jet crashing into the capital city in 2020. All these weapons systems are inherently accident. Prone because of two characteristics identified by organizational sociologist Charles Perrow decades ago: interactive complexity and tight coupling, that combine to make accidents a normal feature of the operation of some hazardous technologies. The first characteristic refers to the possibility that different parts of the system can affect each other in unexpected ways, thus producing unanticipated outcomes. The second makes it hard to stop the resulting sequence of events. For Perrow, the dangerous accidents lie in the system, not in the components, and are inevitable. Perhaps the best and most troubling proof of this proposition is in the realm of nuclear weapons, which embody all the properties of high-risk technological systems. Despite decades of efforts to ensure safety, these systems have suffered many failures, accidents and close calls. During 1979 to 1980, for example, there were several false warnings of Soviet missile attacks, some of which resulted in U.S. nuclear forces being put on alert, illustrating political theorist Benoit Pilopidis' observation that luck has long played a crucial role in preserving the world from nuclear devastation. The BrahMos accident was not more consequential because of three lucky circumstances. First, the missile was not armed with a warhead. Second, the accident occurred during peacetime, not during a bout of armed conflict or a period of military tension between the two countries. Had that been the case, the Pakistani military might have interpreted it as a deliberate attack and responded militarily. Third, BrahMos apparently is not designed to carry nuclear weapons, but India has cruise missiles that can carry nuclear warheads, as does Pakistan. Compounding the risk is the mobility of India's expanding fleet of nuclear-capable missiles. These can be launched quickly from specially developed vehicles that move around on roads or rails, meaning that military planners in Pakistan and China, the nuclear-armed neighbors against whom India has war plans, have to be prepared for sudden missile launches from almost anywhere in India's vast landmass. Given the secretive nature of Indian nuclear policymaking, little is known about India's nuclear command and control system. However, the 1999 draft nuclear doctrine called for assured capability to shift from peacetime deployment to fully employable forces in the shortest possible time. Emphasis added. The combination of technology and plans for being able to rapidly launch nuclear weapons raises the risk of accidental and inadvertent escalation to nuclear war. South Asia's geography is pitiless. It would only take 5 to 10 minutes for a missile launched from India to attack Pakistan's national capital, nuclear weapon command posts or bases. For comparison, the flight times between missile launch sites and targets in the United States and Russia are about 30 minutes. Even this extra time may be insufficient. In the event of a military crisis, no leader can make a judicious decision during this period, when faced with impossible choices. But shorter flight times increase the likelihood of mistakes. The mistake that is of greatest concern is a false alarm of an incoming nuclear attack, possibly directed against nuclear forces, Indian or Pakistani, or Russian or NATO. Policymakers may find themselves under immense pressure to launch a preemptive attack, thereby compounding the crisis. The terrible dilemma confronting them would be whether to use their nuclear weapons first or wait for the bombs from the other side to land. Nuclear war, even of a limited nature, between India and Pakistan could lead to millions of deaths in the short term and even graver consequences in the longer term for the region and beyond. Compounding these dangers is the overconfidence of India's officials, who displayed no recognition of the gravity of the BrahMos accident. A technical malfunction had led to the accidental firing of a missile, the official statement declared. Noting glibly, it is learnt that the missile landed in an area of Pakistan. India's defense minister assured parliament members that the system is very reliable and safe, as the legendary analyst of nuclear command and control Bruce Blair warned. Among nuclear weapons system managers and operators, there is an illusion of safety that masks the systematic potential for tragedy on a monumental scale. Whether it is India and Pakistan preparing for a fifth war, or the forces of a nuclear-armed Russia struggling ever more violently to subdue Ukraine and stem the flow of lethal NATO weapons, such illusions threaten the destruction of cities and may lead to the killing of nations. nuclear weapons accidents. Since 1950, there have been 32 nuclear weapon accidents, known as broken arrows. A broken arrow is defined as an unexpected event involving nuclear weapons that result in the accidental launching, firing, detonating, theft or loss of the weapon. To date, 6 nuclear weapons have been lost and never recovered. 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, 1950s. Date: February 13, 1950. The B-36 was en route from Eielson AFB to Carswell AFB on a simulated combat profile mission. The weapon aboard the aircraft had a dummy capsule installed. After 6 hours of flight, the aircraft developed serious mechanical difficulties, making it necessary to shut down 3 engines. The aircraft was at 12,000 feet altitude. Icing conditions complicated the emergency and level flight could not be maintained. The aircraft headed out over the Pacific Ocean and dropped the weapon from 8,000 feet. A bright flash occurred on impact, followed by a sound and shock wave. Only the weapon's high explosive material detonated. The aircraft was then flown over Princess Royal Island where the crew bailed out. The aircraft wreckage was later found on Vancouver Island. Date: April 11, 1950. Location: Manzano Base, New Mexico. Aircraft departed Kirtland AFB at 9:38 p.m. and crashed into a mountain on Manzano Base approximately 3 minutes later, killing the crew. Detonators were installed in the bomb on board the aircraft. The bomb case was demolished and some high explosive material burned in the gasoline fire. Other pieces of unburned he were scattered throughout the wreckage. 4 spare detonators in their carrying case were recovered undamaged. There were no contamination or recovery problems. The recovered components of the weapon were returned to the Atomic Energy Commission. Both the weapon and the capsule of nuclear material were on board the aircraft, but the capsule was not inserted for safety reasons. A nuclear detonation was not possible. Date: July 13, 1950. Location: Lebanon, Ohio. The B-50 was on a training mission from Biggs AFB, Texas. The aircraft was flying at 7,000 feet on a clear day. Aircraft nosed down and flew into the ground, killing 4 officers and 12 airmen. The high explosive portion of the weapon aboard detonated on impact. There was no nuclear capsule aboard the aircraft. Date: August 5, 1950. Location: Fairfield Suisun AFB, California. A B-29 carrying a weapon, but no capsule, experienced 2 runaway propellers and landing gear retraction difficulties on takeoff from Fairfield Suisun AF9, now Travis AFB. The aircraft attempted an emergency landing and crashed and burned. The fire was fought for 12-15 minutes before the weapon's high explosive material detonated. 19 crew members and rescue personnel were killed in the crash and or the resulting detonation, including General Travis. Date: November 10, 1950. Location: Quebec, Canada. A B-50 jettisoned a Mark IV bomb over the St. Lawrence River near Rivière-du-Loup, about 300 miles northeast of Montreal. The weapon's high explosive, detonated on impact. Although lacking its essential plutonium core, the explosion did scatter nearly 100 pounds, 45 kg, of uranium. The plane later landed safely at a U.S. Air Force base in Maine. Date: March 10, 1956. Location: Mediterranean Sea. Exact location unknown. The aircraft was one of a flight of 4 scheduled for non-stop deployment from MacDill AFB to an overseas airbase. Takeoff from MacDill and first refueling were normal. The second refueling point was over the Mediterranean Sea. In preparation for this, the flight penetrated solid cloud formation to descend to the refueling level of 14,000 feet. The base of the clouds was 14,500 feet and visibility was poor. The aircraft, carrying 2 nuclear capsules in carrying cases, never made contact with the tanker. An extensive search failed to locate any traces of the missing aircraft or crew. No weapons were aboard the aircraft. Only 2 capsules of nuclear weapons material in carrying cases. A nuclear detonation was not possible. Date: July 27, 1956. Location: Great Britain A B-47 aircraft with no weapons aboard was on a routine training mission making a touch-and-go landing when the aircraft suddenly went out of control and slid off the runway, crashing into a storage igloo containing several nuclear weapons. The bombs did not burn or detonate. There were no contamination or cleanup problems. The damaged weapons and components were returned to the Atomic Energy Commission. The weapons that were involved were in storage configuration. No capsules of nuclear materials were in the weapons or present in the building. Date: May 22, 1957. Location: Kirtland AFB, New Mexico. The aircraft was ferrying a weapon from Biggs AFB, Texas, to Kirtland AFB at 11:50 a.m. MST. While approaching Kirtland at an altitude of 1.700 feet, the weapon dropped from the bomb bay, taking the bomb bay doors with it. Weapon parachutes were deployed but apparently did not fully retard the fall because of the low altitude. The impact point was approximately 4.5 miles south of the Kirtland Control Tower and 0.3 miles west of the Sandia Base Reservation. The high explosive material detonated, completely destroying the weapon and making a crater approximately 25 feet in diameter and 12 feet deep. Fragments and debris were scattered as far as 1 mile from the impact point. The release mechanism locking pin was being removed at the time of release. It was standard procedure at that time that the locking pin be removed during takeoff and landing to allow for emergency jettison of the weapon if necessary. Recovery and cleanup operations were conducted by Field Command, Armed Forces Special Weapons Project. A radiological survey of the area disclosed no radioactivity beyond the lip of the crater, at which point the level was 0.5 milliroentgens. There were no health or safety problems. Both the weapon and capsule were on board the aircraft, but the capsule was not inserted for safety reasons. Nuclear detonation was not possible. Date: July 28, 1957. Location: Atlantic Ocean. 2 weapons were jettisoned from a C-124 aircraft on July 28 off the east coast of the United States. There were 3 weapons and 1 nuclear capsule aboard the aircraft at the time. Nuclear components were not installed in the weapons. The C-124 aircraft was en route from Dover AFB, Delaware, when a loss of power from number 1 and 2 engines was experienced. Maximum power was applied to the remaining engines. However, level flight could not be maintained. At this point, the decision was made to jettison cargo in the interest of safety of the aircraft and crew. The first weapon was jettisoned at 4.500 feet altitude. The second weapon was jettisoned at approximately 2,500 feet altitude. No detonation occurred from either weapon. Both weapons are presumed to have been damaged from impact with the ocean surface. Both weapons are presumed to have submerged almost instantly. The ocean varies in depth in the area of the jettisonings. The C-124 landed at an airfield in the vicinity of Atlantic City, New Jersey, with the remaining weapon and the nuclear capsule aboard. A search for the weapons or debris had negative results. Date: October 11, 1957. Location: Homestead AFB, Florida. The B-47 departed Homestead AFB shortly after midnight on a deployment mission. Shortly after liftoff, one of the aircraft's outrigger tires exploded. The aircraft crashed in an uninhabited area approximately 3,800 feet from the end of the runway. The aircraft was carrying 1 weapon in ferry configuration in the bomb bay and 1 nuclear capsule in a carrying case in the crew compartment. The weapon was enveloped in flames which burned and smoldered for approximately 4 hours, after which time it was cooled with water. 2 low-order high-explosive detonations occurred during the burning. The nuclear capsule and its carrying case were recovered intact and only slightly damaged by heat. Approximately 1/2 of the weapon remained. All major components were damaged but were identifiable and accounted for. Date: January 31, 1958. Location: Overseas Base AB-47 with 1 weapon in strike configuration was making a simulated takeoff during an exercise alert. When the aircraft reached approximately 30 knots on the runway, the left rear wheel casting failed. The tail struck the runway and a fuel tank ruptured. The aircraft caught fire and burned for 7 hours. Firemen fought the fire for the allotted 10 minutes firefighting time for high explosive contents of that weapon. then evacuated the area. The high explosive did not detonate, but there was some contamination in the immediate area of the crash. After the wreckage and the asphalt beneath it were removed and the runway washed down, no contamination was detected. One fire truck and one fireman's clothing showed slight alpha contamination until washed. Following the accident, exercise alerts were temporarily suspended and B-47 wheels were checked for defects. Date: January 31st, 1958. Location: Overseas Base AB-47 with one weapon in strike configuration was making a simulated takeoff during an exercise alert. When the aircraft reached approximately 30 knots on the runway, the left rear wheel casting failed. The tail struck the runway and a fuel tank ruptured. The aircraft caught fire and burned for 7 hours. Firemen fought the fire for the allotted 10 minutes firefighting time for high explosive contents of that weapon, then evacuated the area. The high explosive did not detonate, but there was some contamination in the immediate area of the crash. After the wreckage and the asphalt beneath it were removed and the runway washed down, no contamination was detected. One fire truck and one fireman's clothing showed slight alpha contamination until washed. Following the accident, exercise alerts were temporarily suspended and B-47 wheels were checked for defects. Date: February 5th, 1958. Location: Savannah River, Georgia. The B-47 was on a simulated combat mission that originated at Homestead, AFB, Florida. While near Savannah, Georgia, the B-47 had a mid-air collision at 3:30 a.m. with an F-86 aircraft. Following the collision, the B-47 attempted 3 times to land at Hunter, AFB, Georgia, with a weapon on board. Because of the condition of the aircraft, its airspeed could not be reduced enough to ensure a safe landing. Therefore, the decision was made to jettison the weapon rather than expose Hunter, AFB to the possibility of a high explosive detonation. A nuclear detonation was not possible since the nuclear capsule was not aboard the aircraft. The weapon was jettisoned into the water several miles from the mouth of the Savannah River, Georgia, in Wausau Sound of Tybee Beach. The precise weapon impact point is unknown. The weapon was dropped from an altitude of approximately 7,200 feet at an aircraft speed of 180-190 knots. No detonation occurred. After jettison, the B-47 landed safely. A 3-square-mile area was searched using a ship with divers and underwater demolition team technicians using galvanic drag and handheld sonar devices. The weapon was not found. The search was terminated on April 16, 1958. The weapon was considered to be irretrievably lost. Date: February 28, 1958. Location: Great Britain. A B-47 based at the U.S. Air Base at Greenham Common, England, reportedly loaded with a nuclear weapon, caught fire and completely burned. In 1960, signs of high-level radioactive contamination were detected around the base by a group of scientists working at the Atomic Weapons Research Establishment, AWR. The U.S. government has never confirmed whether the accident involved a nuclear warhead. Date: March 11, 1958. Location: Florence, South Carolina. On March 11, 1958, at 3:53 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, a B-47E departed Hunter, AFB, Georgia's number 3 aircraft in a flight of 4 en route to an overseas base. After leveling off at 15,000 feet, the aircraft accidentally jettisoned an unarmed nuclear weapon which impacted a sparsely populated area 1/2 miles east of Florence, South Carolina. The bomb's high explosive material exploded on impact. The detonation caused property damage and several injuries on the ground. The aircraft returned to base without further incident. No capsule of nuclear materials was aboard the 8-47 or installed in the weapon. Date: November 4, 1958. Location: Dress, AFB, Texas. A B-47 caught fire on takeoff. 3 crew members successfully ejected. 1 was killed when the aircraft crashed from an altitude of 1,500 feet. 1 nuclear weapon was on board when the aircraft crashed. The resultant detonation of the high explosive made a crater 35 feet in diameter and 6 feet deep. Nuclear materials were recovered near the crash site. Date: November 26, 1958 location, Chenault AFB, Louisiana AB-47 caught fire on the ground. The single nuclear weapon on board was destroyed by the fire. Contamination was limited to the immediate vicinity of the weapon residue within the aircraft wreckage. Date, January 18, 1959 location, Pacific Base. The aircraft was parked on a hardstand in a ground alert configuration. The external load consisted of a weapon on the left intermediate station and 3 fuel tanks, both inboard stations and the right intermediate station. When the starter button was depressed during a practice alert, an explosion and fire occurred when the external fuel tanks inadvertently jettisoned. Fire trucks at the scene put out the fire in about 7 minutes. The capsule was not in the vicinity of the aircraft and was not involved in the accident. There were no contamination or cleanup problems. Date, July 5, 1959 location, Barksdale AFB, Louisiana AC-124 on a nuclear logistics movement mission crashed on takeoff. The aircraft was destroyed by fire, which also destroyed one weapon. No nuclear or high explosive detonation occurred. Safety devices functioned as designed. Limited contamination was present over a very small area immediately below the destroyed weapon. This contamination did not hamper rescue or firefighting operations. Date, September 25, 1959 off Whidbey Island, Washington AUS. Savvy PSM aircraft ditched in Puget Sound off Whidbey Island, Washington. It was carrying an unarmed nuclear anti-submarine weapon containing no nuclear material. The weapon was not recovered. Date, October 15, 1959 location, Hardinsburg, Kentucky. The B-52 departed Columbus Air Force Base, Mississippi at 2:30 p.m. CST, October 15, 1959. This aircraft assumed the number 2 position in a flight of 2. The KC-135 departed Columbus Air Force Base at 5:33 p.m. CST as the 12th tanker aircraft in a flight of 2 scheduled to refuel the B-52s. Rendezvous for refueling was accomplished in the vicinity of Hardinsburg, Kentucky at 32,000 feet. It was night, the weather was clear, and there was no turbulence. Shortly after the B-52 began refueling from the KC-135, the 2 aircraft collided. The instructor pilot and pilot of the B-52 ejected, followed by the electronic warfare officer and the radar navigator. The co-pilot, navigator, instructor navigator, and tail gunner failed to leave the B-52. All 4 crew members in the KC-135 were fatally injured. The B-52's 2 unarmed nuclear weapons were recovered intact. One had been partially burned, but this did not result in the dispersion of any nuclear material or other contamination. 1960s date, June 7, 1960 location, McGuire AFB, New Jersey. A bomber air defense missile in ready storage condition permitting launch in 2 minutes was destroyed by explosion and fire after a high-pressure helium tank exploded and ruptured the missile's fuel tanks. The warhead was also destroyed by the fire, although the high explosive did not detonate. Nuclear safety devices acted as designed. Contamination was restricted to an area immediately beneath the weapon and an adjacent elongated area approximately 100 feet long, caused by drain-off of firefighting water. Date, January 24, 1961 location, Goldsboro, North Carolina. During a B-52 airborne alert mission, structural failure of the right wing resulted in 2 weapons separating from the aircraft during aircraft breakup at 2010, 000 feet altitude. 1 bomb parachute deployed and the weapon received little impact damage. The other bomb fell free and broke apart upon impact. No explosion occurred. 5 of the 8 crew members survived. A portion of one weapon, containing uranium, could not be recovered despite excavation in the waterlogged farmland to a depth of 50 feet. The Air Force subsequently purchased an easement requiring permission for anyone to dig there. There is no detectable radiation and no hazard in the area. Date, March 14, 1961 Yuba City, California. A B-52 experienced failure of the crew compartment pressurization system, forcing descent to 10,000 feet altitude. Increased fuel consumption caused fuel exhaustion before rendezvous with a tanker aircraft. The crew bailed out at 10,000 feet except for the aircraft commander who stayed with the aircraft co 4,000 feet steering the plane away from a populated area. The 2 nuclear weapons on board were torn from the aircraft on ground impact. The high explosive did not detonate. Safety devices worked as designed and there was no nuclear contamination. Date: July 4, 1961. Location: North Sea. A cooling system failed, contaminating crew members, missiles, and some parts of a K-19 Hotel-class Soviet nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine off Norway. One of the sub's 2 reactors soared to 800 degrees Celsius and threatened to melt down the reactor's fuel rods. Several fatalities were reported. Date: November 13, 1963. Location: Atomic Energy Commission Storage Igloo, Medina Base, Texas. An explosion involving 123,000 pounds of high explosive components of nuclear weapons caused minor injuries to 3 Atomic Energy Commission employees. There was little contamination from the nuclear components stored elsewhere in the building. The components were from obsolete weapons being disassembled. Date: January 13, 1964. Location: Cumberland, Maryland. A -52D was en route from Westover Air Force Base, Massachusetts, to its home base at Turner Air Force Base, Georgia. The crash occurred approximately 17 miles SW of Cumberland, Maryland. The aircraft was carrying 2 weapons. Both weapons were in a tactical ferry configuration. No mechanical or electrical connections had been made to the aircraft and the safing switches were in the safe position. Prior to the crash, the pilot had requested a change of altitude because of severe air turbulence at 29,500 feet. The aircraft was cleared to climb to 33,000 feet. During the climb, the aircraft encountered violent air turbulence and aircraft structural failure subsequently occurred. Of the 5 aircrew members, only the pilot and co-pilot survived. The gunner and navigator ejected but died of exposure to sub-zero temperatures after successfully reaching the ground. The radar navigator did not eject and died upon aircraft impact. The crash site was an isolated mountainous and wooded area. The site had 14 inches of new snow covering the aircraft wreckage, which was scattered over an area of approximately 100 yards square. The weather during the recovery and cleanup operation involved extreme cold and gusty winds. Both weapons remained in the aircraft until it crashed and were relatively intact in the approximate center of the wreckage area. Date: December 5, 1964. Location: Ellsworth, AFB, South Dakota. The LGM-30 Minuteman I missile was on Strategic Alerted Launch Facility, LF, L02, Ellsworth, AFB, South Dakota. 2 airmen were dispatched to the LF to repair the inner zone IS security system. In the midst of their checkout of the IS system, 1 retro-rocket in the spacer below the re-entry vehicle, RV, fired, causing the RV to fall about 75 feet to the floor of the silo. When the RV struck the bottom of the silo, the arming and fusing altitude control subsystem containing the batteries was torn loose, thus removing all sources of power from the RV. The RV structure received considerable damage. All safety devices operated properly in that they did not sense the proper sequence of events to allow arming the warhead. There was no detonation or radioactive contamination. Date: December 8, 1964. Location: Bunker Hill, now Grissom, AFB, Indiana. SAC aircraft were taxiing during an exercise alert. As 13-58 reached a position directly behind the aircraft on the runway ahead of it, the aircraft ahead brought advanced power. As a result of the combination of the jet blast from the aircraft ahead, the icy runway surface conditions, and the power applied to the aircraft while attempting to turn onto the runway, control was lost and the aircraft slid off the left-hand side of the taxiway. The left main landing gear passed over a flush-mounted taxiway light fixture and 10 feet further along in its travel, grazed the left edge of a concrete light base. 10 feet further, the left main landing gear struck a concrete electrical manhole box, and the aircraft caught on fire. When the aircraft came to rest, all 3 crew members aboard began abandoning the aircraft. The aircraft commander and defensive systems operator egressed with only minor injuries. The navigator ejected in his escape capsule. which impacted 548 feet from the aircraft. He did not survive. Portions of the 5 nuclear weapons on board burned. Contamination was limited to the immediate area of the crash and was subsequently removed. Date: October 11, 1965. Location: Wright-Patterson AFB, Ohio. The aircraft was being refueled in preparation for a routine logistics mission when a fire occurred at the aft end of the refueling trailer. The fuselage of the aircraft, containing only components of nuclear weapons and a dummy training unit, was destroyed by the fire. There were no casualties. The resultant radiation hazard was minimal. Minor contamination was found on the aircraft, cargo, and clothing of explosive ordnance disposal and firefighting personnel, and was removed by normal cleaning. Date: December 5, 1965. Location: Pacific Ocean. An A-4 Skyhawk attack aircraft loaded with one B-43 nuclear weapon rolled off the deck of the USS Ticonderoga. Pilot, plane, and weapon were never found. The incident occurred more than 500 miles from land. Date: mid-1960s. Date undetermined. Location: Kara-Sea. Soviet nuclear-powered icebreaker Lenin was forced to dump its reactors in the Kara-Sea. Some accounts said the Lenin experienced a reactor meltdown. Date: January 17, 1966. Location: Palomars, Spain. The B-52 and the KC-135 collided during a routine high-altitude air refueling operation. Both aircraft crashed near Palomars, Spain. 4 of the 11 crew members survived. The B-52 carried 4 nuclear weapons. 1 was recovered on the ground, and 1 was recovered from the sea. On April 7, after extensive search and recovery efforts, 2 of the weapons' high explosive materials exploded on impact with the ground, releasing some radioactive materials. Approximately 1,400 tons of slightly contaminated soil and vegetation were removed to the United States for storage at an approved site. Representatives of the Spanish government monitored the cleanup operation. Date: January 21, 1968. Location: Thule, Greenland. A B-52 from Plattsburgh AFB, New York, crashed and burned some 7 miles southwest of the runway at Thule AB, Greenland while approaching the base to land. 6 of the 7 crew members survived. The bomber carried 4 nuclear weapons, all of which were destroyed by fire. Some radioactive contamination occurred in the area of the crash, which was on the sea ice. Some 237,000 cubic feet of contaminated ice, snow, and water, with crash debris, were removed to an approved storage site in the United States over the course of a 4-month operation. Although an unknown amount of contamination was dispersed by the crash, environmental sampling showed normal readings in the area after the cleanup was completed. Representatives of the Danish government monitored the cleanup operations. Date: April 11, 1968. Location: Pacific Ocean. A Soviet diesel-powered Golf-class ballistic missile submarine sank about 750 miles northwest of the island of Oahu, Hawaii. Reports say the submarine was carrying 3 nuclear-armed ballistic missiles, as well as several nuclear torpedoes. Part of the submarine was reportedly raised using the CIA's specially constructed Glomar Explorer deepwater salvage ship. Date: Spring 1968. Location: at sea, Atlantic. Details remain classified. Date: November 1969. Location: White Sea. The U.S. nuclear-powered submarine Gato reportedly collided with a Soviet submarine on November 14 or 15, 1969, near the entrance of the White Sea. 1970s. Date: April 12, 1970. Location: Atlantic Ocean. A Soviet November-class nuclear-powered attack submarine experienced an apparent nuclear propulsion problem in the Atlantic Ocean about 300 miles northwest of Spain. Although an attempt to attach a tow line from a Soviet block merchant ship, the submarine apparently sank, killing 52. Date: November 22, 1975. Location: off Sicily, Italy. The aircraft carrier USS John F. Kennedy and the cruiser USS Belknap collided in rough seas at night during exercises. Although it was declared as a possible nuclear weapons accident, No subsequent nuclear contamination was discovered during the fire and rescue operations. 1980s date, September 19, 1980 location, Damascus, Arkansas. During routine maintenance in a Titan II silo, an Air Force repairman dropped a heavy wrench socket, which rolled off a work platform and fell toward the bottom of the silo. The socket bounced and struck the missile, causing a leak from a pressurized fuel tank. The missile complex and the surrounding area were evacuated and a team of specialists was called in from Little Rock Air Force Base, the missile's main support base. About 1/2 hours after the initial puncture, fuel vapors within the silo ignited and exploded. The explosion fatally injured one member of the team. 21 other user personnel were injured. The missile's re-entry vehicle, which contained a nuclear warhead, was recovered intact. There was no radioactive contamination. Date, October 3, 1986. Location, Atlantic Ocean. A Soviet Yankee I-class nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine suffered an explosion and fire in one of its missile tubes 480 miles east of Bermuda. The submarine sank while under tow on October 6 in 18,000 feet of water. 2 nuclear reactors and approximately 34 nuclear weapons were on board. Date, April 7, 1989. Location, Atlantic Ocean about 300 miles north of the Norwegian coast. The Komsomolets, a Soviet nuclear-powered attack submarine, caught fire and sank. The vessel's nuclear reactor, 2 nuclear-armed torpedoes, and 42 of the 69 crew members were lost. Date, August 10, 1985. Location, near Vladivostok, Russia. While at the Chazma Bay repair facility, about 35 miles from Vladivostok, an Echo-class Soviet nuclear-powered submarine suffered a reactor explosion. The explosion released a cloud of radioactivity toward Vladivostok but did not reach the city. 10 officers were killed in the explosion. 1990s date, September 27, 1991. Location, White Sea. A missile launch malfunction occurred during a test launch on a Typhoon-class nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine. Date, March 20, 1993. Location, Barents Sea. The U.S. nuclear-powered submarine Grayling collided with the Russian Delta III nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine. Both vessels reportedly suffered only minor damage. Date, February 11, 1992. Location, Barents Sea. A collision between a CIS, Commonwealth of Independent States, Sierra-class nuclear-powered attack submarine with the U.S. nuclear-powered attack submarine Baton Rouge. Both vessels reportedly suffered only minor damage. There is a dispute over the location of the incident in or outside Russian territorial waters. 2000's date, August 12, 2000. Location, Barents Sea. The CIS, Commonwealth of Independent States, Oscar II-class submarine, Kursk, sinks after a massive onboard explosion. Attempts to rescue the 118 men fail. It is thought that a torpedo failure caused the accident. Radiation levels are normal and the submarine had no nuclear weapons on board. Sources, U.S. Defense Department Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, National Security Archive, Greenpeace. Joshua Handler, Princeton University, United Press International, The Associated Press. Blind Man's Bluff, The Untold Story of American Submarine Espionage.